Good evening and welcome to The Price of Fame. My name is Lunga Tshuka and I'll be your host. So, The Price of Fame is a podcast which focuses on the real stories from the journey to success, from the moment of realization of one's purpose or gift. And in these conversations, we hope to shed light on the hardships, the sacrifice, and the mindset our guests have to overcome to obtain the current position in their career. These are their stories. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, creeping through the grass. Four-time SADMC champion, Western Cape regional champion in the house. Also dubbed as DJ of the decade, the legend, the living legend, award-winning DJ in the house. Ladies and gentlemen, please make some noise and welcome to the screen, Grand Master Ready Deep. Hey, DJ Grandmaster in the house. Woo!
Hey man, good evening, Lunga. Good evening to all of your viewers. I like the intro, man. Big ups to you. Dig it.
Give thanks. I'm awesome. I'm trying to send in my CV there. Hey, maybe you can get it.
Please do. Please do. We can definitely do awesome boom bap track. We can turn that.
Yeah.
That boom bap track. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. And I know you kill it on that style, All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the Grand Master Ready D in the house. When I started the show, you were one of the people that was on the list immediately. I was like, I have to have the Grand Master on this because I know I've seen parts of your highlights of your journey growing up, seeing you on TV here and there and all of that stuff. But obviously in the gaps you have obviously things that you've done. So we're going to get into all of that tonight. Sure. Wow. You have paved the way for so many of us, not just like for DJs. You've done a lot with your skill in hip hop alone. How has 2021 been treating you so far?
So far, 2021, it's definitely been a better year than 2020, no doubt. Yes. It's not exactly where we wish for it to be from, let's say, more from a financial side of things,
Yeah.
But in terms of the amount of time that we managed to spend with family, especially, I think I'm grateful for that. Because prior to this pandemic, I lived past my family. Although we stayed in the same house, it's just I had such a busy schedule. So with the pandemic and lockdown and all these things, it kind of slowed down things for me on one end. And then on the other end, you have to find resourceful and creative ways, to keep busy and to put yourself out there and, to keep your viewers, your fans and your supporters, keep them up to date and entertained.
Yes, that's very true. That's what I'm doing right now, when the lockdown hit in the beginning, I first thought, I'm just going to wait it out. It's probably going to be a month or two, because I had plans, I'm not going to take it too serious, these things happen, come and go, just wait it out. But like you said, it's been unpredictable, we don't know what's happening and we have to find other ways. We have to adapt, and find other ways to put yourself out there, keep your fans and keep your audience also still motivated with the way that you usually do things, but just on a different platform.
Absolutely.
Super cool. That's super, super cool. All right. So I want to take it all the way back, all the way back to the little kid, Dion, before you even heard about hip hop. And I think I heard once on an interview, I think it was on Jam Alley. No. On the interview, I think you used to be on to a crew called Pop Glide. Is that true?
Prophets of the City.
Oh, Prophets of the City. Yes. Yes, you're on Jam Alley. I remember there was an episode.
Actually, before Prophets of the City, I belonged to a b-boy crew called the Ballastic Rockers. The Ballastic Rockers kind of evolved into Prophets of the City, but prior to Ballastic Rockers, the crew was called the City Kids. And Pop Glide crew, they used to be amongst the adversaries, the crews that we used to battle. from time to time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay. So take us back to the moment like when you first you got introduced to hip hop. Who opened the door for you? How did you stumble across it? And how did you start? And how did you become the Grand Master? Wow.
Wow. Sure. That's
That's a
definitely
journey, eh?
that's a long journey, man. Even if I sit back and think now, I'm like, holy Lord, did you actually take that journey? Did you do these things? And the only thing
Yeah.
that reminds me is when I bump into people and they remind me, and when I look back into my boxes and I see all my accreditation cards going all the way back to the 80s, and I'm like, holy Lord, you've been a busy guy.
Yeah. I mean, you
But
just
just to
keep
take
going,
it back,
eh?
yeah, man. So I was born and raised, actually born in Lansdowne and raised in District 6 because my parents lived in District 6 though. So I was born in my aunt's house. So District 6, the community was always driven by music. So thankfully, because of that, I was exposed to so many different sounds. And
Yeah.
fortunately, my dad had a record player in the house. And when I came across hip hop, I could immediately relate to that piece of gear. Unfortunately, I lost my dad just about a year before we were forcefully kicked out of District 6 due to the previous apartheid government's Group Areas Act. But just
Yes.
before our removal from the area, my sister, she's 4 years older than me. And of course, at that time, she was a teenager. And she had friends that were like really cool homies, you know, they were the trendsetters of their era. And one Saturday, I remember that clearly, man. They rolled up in front of our house in Upper Shepherd Street, District 6, in their red and white 63 Impala. And I'm not telling you a word of a lie. The original, legit Chevy Impala that all the rappers are losing their minds over. They had one of those. They flipped the boot open. They took out this little portable turntable with a whole batch of vinyls because they used to work on sea and they used to do all these travels abroad with their work, and they came back from the US, and they came back with all this records. And the first hip hop song that I heard was "Rapper's Delight" by Sugar Hill Gang. That afternoon, when I put that record on the deck, dropped that needle on the record, man, and I could relate to the song. Number one, the music. I remember the music because Rapper's Delight samples a band called Shix, a disco hit called Good Times. So that bass line, doom, 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 doom. You know, I could relate to that. That first
Yeah.
drew me in. And then I heard these guys rhyming. And I was like, but this sounds very familiar because as a kid, we
Yeah.
were always rhyming. And,
Mm,
we were always having jokes in rhyme form and we were always speaking in a rhythmic pattern. So that was the
yeah.
first hip hop song I was introduced to. And in that same pile of vinyl, they had a record by an artist called Curtis Blow, who later became known as Run DMC's manager. So one of the big songs in there was a song called The Breaks. And everything they were talking about, it was all aspirational stuff. They were talking about color TVs and swimming pools. And I was like, holy Lord, if only one day I could have a color TV and a swimming pool and a cool car like that,
Yeah.
then I would have made it in life. So that was my introduction to hip hop music.
Wow. That's really cool because I was gonna speak about actually about the music now because like with the music, you like with well, if people look at hip hop, and if just from an outside perspective and they like just see what they see on mainstream, they would probably see just gangster rap. And there are so many different versions of rap music in hip hop. Like I mean, we had the NWA who had a completely different direction. I'm talking about police brutality against young black kids in the hood. Then we had gangster rap as well. We also had storytelling, like you said now, where they're speaking about colorful TVs and all of that. And sometimes it was funny stories, where they're speaking about macking on a girl or something like that. So it was all
Absolutely.
those genres. And it's
Yeah.
actually cool to hear that you came from, you started from that influence. So you say Curtis Blow was your, like, and those people, who was actually popping at the time when you started?
Man, at that time, there was no hip hop. It was foreign
Oh,
to everybody. Hip hop was foreign to everybody in this country, as far as I know. When hip hop started to surface, It was practically in 1980, 81, 81, 82.
Yeah.
We would then move to Mitchell's Plain. And as a kid growing up in Mitchell's Plain and a typical kid on the Cape Flats, we used to watch these kung fu movies and we used to try
Yeah.
all these things, that we see in the movies and the backflips and pretend that we were Silver Fox flying through the air. And we used to make our own moon chucks with my mom's brooms and stuff and always land up in trouble for doing stuff like that. So a
Yes.
friend of mine who was a popular DJ in Cape Town, DJ Razano X, his parents had a video recorder. And he recorded this music video that came on TV once. And in this video, there was kids doing these gymnastic movements in the video. And I was like, holy crap, this is like dope on another level. Number one, I could relate to the kids because they look like kids in our neighborhood. The song was a song titled Buffalo Girls by an avant-garde musician from the UK that went to New York to kind of capture the trends in New York. And he recorded this album, and he did some work with local DJs from New York. And in his music video, he actually had B-Boy or Breaking Pioneers, the Rocksteady Crew, New York City Breakers. He had these kids dressed up in these oversized clothing with painted faces, these weird hats, and doing this very unusual dance. All of that blew my mind. And then I saw DJs scratching on the decks. I couldn't understand it, but I remembered I grew up with a turntable. My dad had one, and once again, I'm drawn in. And we started doing this dance thinking it was a new gymnastics to a strange kind of music. And about 2 years later, we only learned, because it started to pick up in the mainstream media, that this thing is called break dancing, and it's a part of something called hip hop. And remember, at that time, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have internet, there was no computers, none of that type of things. So we had to practically depend on the mainstream media to feed us the information. And then Michael Jackson was actually the craze at that time. He did Billie Jean. He did his the album Off the Wall. I think Billie Jean was the song. No, I think Billie Jean was on the second album. And that's when Michael Jackson just completely blew up, in our areas throughout Cape Town. And then they had this Michael Jackson competition in Mitchell's Plain Town Center. That was like the central shopping location for the whole of Mitchell's Plain at the time. So they had this Michael Jackson competition, and then myself, another kid known as Khocha, he became known as the granddad of graffiti art in South Africa. Myself, Khocha, and DJ Razano, we formed this three-man crew called the City Kids. And here we are rocking up to this Michael Jackson competition, not looking like Michael Jackson, not dancing like Michael Jackson. And we started doing this gymnastics to this really weird music. We found a very interesting song in one of the record stores on a vinyl, and we thought, let's just dance to this because it sounds like this dance should be done to this music. Thankfully, we won the competition. There was talent scouts from a local nightclub, and watching the contest, they reached out to us, and we became the resident dancers at this club called Club Fantasy in Mitchell's Plain Town Center. And more competitions popped up. We started to discover that there was more breaking elsewhere in Cape Town City. And then the dance competition started to happen. And that's when we managed to battle and interact with more B-boys, in the scene, or more breakers in the scene. And this is how we came across the Pop Glad crew, people like Emil from Black Noise. And, that was the type of interactions. And a lot of the music wasn't really freely available. And how we received the music was through one of our members that he had to go. In fact, he chose to go back to the UK because of the apartheid policy. Back then, young white men, it was their duty and obligation to join the military forces. And he didn't want to do that, go to the military, then come back and then get sent off into the townships and then, start freaking harassing, assaulting, people of color. And he wasn't down with that whole thing. So with him being located in the UK, he used to send me cassette tapes all the time. And we had so many other friends who had family, relatives, pen pals, also living somewhere else in the world, in the US, in the UK. And this is how the music came in. And we used to do a lot of exchanges of mixtapes. And that's practically how the hip hop music started to spread out in Cape Town City, as far as I know. Yeah. So that was
Wow.
just a little bit, of the beginning days. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy because like I know you play a huge role in terms of like the influence of the hip hop culture in South Africa, and in Cape Town also. Like there's a lot of things that you started, we've heard from you first, and you're part of the first front runners, like you say, and it's actually very interesting to hear how you actually got to actually share the music. I actually got to get the music through tapes and all of like, wow, like things are so easy right now. Like it's so hard to actually
And
imagine that.
I'm telling you, when
Went through
I
all of the trouble.
and the only way of communication was a letter. I had to wait for a letter to get sent because making a
Yeah,
phone call at the time was just that was impossible to do. And then my friend used to send me a letter first. This is DJ Aski, and he was the white guy living in the UK. He sent me a letter first to say, D, expect the tape at the end of the month, at least the end of every single month. I promise you,
yeah,
man, when that tape arrived in that little brown envelope, my Lord, it's like the heavens opened. It's like heaven
yeah,
open. You pull that tape out, you pop it into the cassette deck, and you're the only person on this continent that's got these
yeah,
songs, these beats. There's nobody else. I
yeah.
knew that for a fact because of the music that he sourced, the
Yes,
independent record labels, and the types of artists that he chased at the time. So we knew what we had was practically solid gold. And I still have most of those tapes to this day, still
wow.
immaculate condition. I still have them to this day. So that was kind of the experience. So now you being exposed to artists like Schoolie D. Gee was there's so many Busy B. Man, I'm taking you back to artists that were around in the 70s that started to record in the 80s. And this was just after Rapper's Delight with the Sugar Gang
Yeah,
and Curtis Blow. And then it was the arrival of Public Enemy and LL Cool J and Run DMC. And that is when hip hop started to sound different, look different. The attitudes were different, the beats and all
yes,
those. So that was like a transitional point for hip hop music at the time. So thankfully, we had friends like that could keep us updated and keep us, looking and sounding fresh. And he used to send us a lot of hip hop magazines as well and urban magazines from the UK. And that's also how we managed to keep up with the
yeah,
trends. And of course, that was all inspiration for us.
yeah. Can you take us through the transition from Prophets of the City and you breaking away? Because was your name Ready D when you were with Prophets of the City, or did you go under a different name when you were with Prophets of the City? And how did you
Yeah.
become Ready D?
Yes, the story with Ready D, right? Being, I'll just say, being active in hip hop as a mobile DJ, that was the one thing. I started doing graffiti art as well. Um, B-boying or breaking or break dancing. That was kind of like our core thing. And we did a little bit of emceeing as well at the time, but it was nothing serious. It was just amongst
Yeah,
the homies and to entertain people at home, when we had these house parties. It was that type of thing.
yes,
So I was always the guy that would suggest to always be the hypest guy in the crew. So whenever there was opportunity to dance or to battle crews, I was like, guys, let's go, let's go. And they always just say, slow down, you're always ready. Why don't you just calm down for a second? We're not ready. And I'm like, no, guys, come, let's go. We got to go here. We got to go there. We got to jump on a train. We got to, jump fences and try and gate crash wherever we possibly could just to go and dance and throw down. So that's practically how the name Ready came about. So I dropped my hip hop name of the era, which was Kid Strut, because of a kind of like a strutting, popping movement that we used to do when we used to dance. So I dropped
yeah,
that name and it became Ready. And D was, of course, the first letter of the name that my mom gave me, which is Dion. So that was Ready D. And within Prophets of the City, how Prophets of the City came to be was practically through our journeys and our battles that used to happen in the city center. So we used to jump on a train early in the morning on a Saturday to go and battle crews, on Cape Town Station, on the Grand Parade, in St. George's Mall. And I'm talking, this is during the days of apartheid. So we used to get
Yeah.
chased by cops and security, from one location to the next. And eventually, a group of friends of ours introduced us to this punk rock club that used to be right opposite the castle in Harrington Street. And that club was called Club Teasers, and it's got nothing to do with the strip joint. I'm always telling people this, but nothing to do with the strip joint. So this
Yeah.
venue was called Club Teasers, and it was known for, rock and reggae, and it was a pretty liberal setting.
Yeah.
To cut a very long story short, we ended up breaking in the club. We got like a 5-minute spot. The 5 minutes became 10 minutes. The club owner liked the fact that we started bringing a lot of people, to the matinee sessions. This was happening in the matinees. It started to grow. We were then allowed to get onto the decks and play our music, while we were having these breaking sessions. And
Yeah.
as time went on, we started to have these rap battles and open mic sessions, and kids would come from all over Cape Town. It was Mitchell's Plain, Elsis River, Ocean View, it was Lunga, it was Googs, you name it, everybody was in the building. And this was actually the first time that we interacted with white kids, believe it or not. And
Yeah.
prior to that, I was always intimidated by white people, always intimidated and fearful of white people. But then there was this one kid that was really, really skillful. He was just freaking off the chain with his lyrics for the time. And I could tell he was heavily inspired and influenced by LL Cool J and Rakim because of his technical rhyme style. And, he would always slaughter everybody in the battles. And then
Yeah.
I heard through a mutual friend that his dad actually owns a recording studio. And then the flashlight or the bulb, went bright, boom. And I was like, damn, Rapper's Delight, swimming pools, cars, girls, money, all that.
Yeah.
That's the home. I need to become homies with this guy. And it
Yeah.
just so happened that this kid, he didn't believe that I could scratch or do any form of turntablism because the DJ box was out of sight from the audience, the crowd. They couldn't really see what the DJs were doing. So all the
Yeah.
scratching and the way we flipped the beats, then people sometimes thought that's just the way that the music was recorded. He
Yeah.
needed convincing. He then, after the club one afternoon, he came to my house and I did a scratch demo for him. And of course, I spoke to him, hustled him to speak to his dad. He went back, spoke to his dad. His dad said, send me a demo. I did a demo on a cassette tape, sent it through. Thankfully, his dad's partner was based in the UK for a very, very long time. So he could relate to what it is that I was doing on that demo.
Yeah.
And he immediately said, guy, we need to bring this guy into the studio. And at that time, I started to compete in the DJ championships as well. So I won my first DMC championship in '89. And that's when we started to go into the recording studio. So there wasn't Prophets of the City really. My mind was like money and cars and girls. That was my mind because I'm a typical guy, young kid from Mitchell's Plain. My mind wasn't on anything else. And
Yeah.
then I didn't know that this kid was on the SRC, man, and he was like heavily involved with politics and all these things. So this kid is freaking talking about Mandela and Steve Biko and its state of emergencies and its riots going on. And he's all on that vibe. And I'm like, guy, you're not seeing the vision over here. Color TVs and swimming pools, guy. Focus, focus. And he's like, no, Amandla. And I'm like, I don't understand this Amandla business that's going on over here. And
Yeah.
because that's how I was introduced to the music, and that was the one thing that was on my mind because I lost my dad. My mom was a single parent. I was hanging out with the wrong crowd at the time as well. So I had different influences at the time. So my motives were different as well. But to cut
Yeah.
the long story short, we were sitting in the recording studio one night looking for beats to sample. He then took out one of his dad's jazz records, which was a record by Abdullah Ibrahim. Played Abdullah Ibrahim, and that's when everything changed for me, right there and then. I became serious about writing lyrics, thinking about my circumstances, and we wrote our first song called the Boxburg Blues. which was quite a political song for that time. And we were sitting still wondering, how are we actually going to move forward with a hip hop crew? Is it just the two of us? I suggested to him, look, I come from a breaking crew called the Ballastic Rockers, and I feel we need to put together a hip hop crew, not a rap crew. So I told him, look, one of our homies is Jasmo. He can do the human beatboxing. He knew of Jasmo because Jasmo used to be in the club beatboxing. And I was like, okay, cool, I'm down. Beatboxing plus Jasmo can pop and lock. And I told him, well, we need to bring in Ramon as well, because he was one of the dopest dancers at the time. And then that was it. The crew was full. So we started off as a four-man crew, and we needed to come up with a name. And then, with writing all these lyrics and becoming more conscious and seeing our communities burn and suffer and being harassed by the military, police, and with all those things happening around politics during that time. And also the music we were listening to, I told him, man, how about calling ourselves Prophets of the City? And he was like, wow, that's actually a really cool name. Let's go for it. And I was like, not because we prophets, it's just us being influenced by all of those that have come before us. And the name is also there to celebrate those teachers, from all those generations, going back hundreds, thousands of years, all those that have made a positive impact on humanity. The name was practically celebrating those greats that came before us. That's actually what the name stands for on a very basic philosophical level, and that was the birth of Prophets of the City right there. So I was still I was still DJing. We started producing. I learned my production skills from him and his dad. This is Shaheen, who became the lead rapper in Prophets of the City. So our crew was like full blown. It was a hip hop crew. We had everything in there: graph artists, DJs, turntablism, poppers, lockers, you name it. It was all about hip hop at the time. Yeah.
That was cool. And for how long was Prophets of the City around doing the thing?
Prophets of the City went flat out all the way through to around about 2005, 2006, if my memory serves me correct. And it just happened that things started to happen in the group officially have not disbanded. So technically Prophets of the City still exists, because whenever we get the call to perform, we had a reunion quite a few years ago at the Cape Town Jazz Festival. That was our first performance together after 15 years. Prior to that, we would always fly into different countries to do certain performances. Our last big performances was in Chicago in the USA. And we spent a lot of time abroad as well, especially in 94 after Mandela was released. The country went through turmoil. We were banned on quite a few occasions. We managed to get a record deal in the UK. In 95, we were based in the UK. We released Universal Soldiers, our fifth album in the UK, and we scooped up so many awards. So we were traveling, throughout the UK, throughout Europe, traveling and performing with people like the Fugees, with Public Enemy, you name it, Lauryn Hill, Chivas, the list goes on, Africa Mambata and the Soul Sonic Force, Showbiz, AG, Ice-T, all these people, So we won the festival circuit at the time. And when we came back to South Africa, Kwaito blew up. We then started a label with our manager at the time called Ghetto Rough Records. And then we started to produce for quite a few Kwaito artists at the time. And during that time, we then formed a crew I formed another collective called Brasse van die Kaap, because I just felt I wanted to use the dialect, the way we spoke it. I wanted that more. I wanted full-length albums to be recorded, in Afrikaans and the way that we use it, because Prophets of the City used to have 1 or 2 songs on the album. And in fact, I just got to share this with you. So the first vernac was Prophets of the City. First Afrikaans hip-hop was Prophets of the City. So there was a lot of firsts on our journeys as well. We met Ishal and Junior. We had songs such as Zulu Muffin, Understand Where I'm Coming From. If you go back onto those albums, you'll actually hear the first vernac on those albums as well. So you can trace a lot of
Yeah.
that history, through those works as well. Then with Brasa Funny Cup, they started to blow up and do very, very well. So I spent a lot of time with Brasa Funny Cup. Shaheen spent a lot of time on his studies. Kwaito blew up. All the artists that we were busy working with, so there was a lot of other things that kind of kept us distracted from profits of the city, and then life takes its course. And that was kind of the journey. And during that time, I entered more championships, won more championship titles, started to get more bookings as a solo performer, as a DJ. We were then based in Joburg for a long time. And I think where I found my breakthrough moment, if you want to call it, in the mainstream arena, was with the Fat Joe show. Fat Joe picked up on me. I became the resident
Yes.
DJ for the Fat Joe show. And ever since then, things just blew up
Yeah.
because of that TV show. Many, many years later, I did another TV show called Deck Tales, DJ Ready D's Deck Tales. And I think that helped as well. And then I managed to land on TV with more shows because I'm also passionate about cars and motorsport and, all the crazy things that goes on with cars and
Yeah.
motorcycles. So we did them Zanzi rides. And I think,
Yeah.
all of those things kind of help to boost the profile as well.
Definitely. I remember the Fat Joe show. I think that's the very first time I saw you. And I remember my sister told me who you were. She's like, that's DJ Lady D, and he's the number one in the world. And all of that. I was
Wow.
like, what? I was like, okay, okay. So I was like, that's when I first took you seriously because I was like, wow, and he's South African. And like, wow, it's actually the first time I met you, I took you seriously immediately because that's how she introduced me. She's like, that's DJ Lady D, and he's like number one in the world. And like, you've been racking up so many titles. I mean, like I don't know, do DJs quiver when they see you walk into the into the competition? How was the
Yeah.
competition been for you, like back then when you used to enter, when you were like ready and like all like fired up? How was the competition back then?
Back then the thing that drew me to the competition was the prizes, nothing else. It wasn't ego, it wasn't anything to build a status. I didn't even think of building a brand. I didn't know what the outcomes, I didn't know what was waiting for me down the line. My mom
Yeah.
couldn't afford to buy me turntables. My first two championships that I won, I didn't even own proper DJ equipment. I had a wooden box that served as a turntable, and everything that I made was all homemade stuff. And I used to cut up little cloth and things and just modify. I couldn't even afford headphones and none of these things, so I had to
Wow.
make do with what I had. And thankfully, one of the guys in our b-boy crew, he had decks. So I had to take a train, man, and come home late at night and risk getting locked up and risk getting chased by gangs, at the time, because it was a very, very rough era, to grow up in at that time. So I had to make do with all of those things. And the thing that really drew me, or at least that motivated me, is I need that equipment. I want that equipment. I'm going to do whatever it takes just so I can win the turntable. I need year 2, I want a mixer. Year 3, it was the whole setup. Year 4, it was even a better setup, So I was like, guy, that's what I need to do. And by any means, I'm going to freaking just go for it, And at the time
Yeah.
that I entered these competitions, remember, hip hop still wasn't mainstream. Many people didn't even know what hip hop was. They didn't even know what the music was called. They didn't even know, it was even linked to a culture at the time. Some DJs played your Rapper's Delights and your Curtis Blows in the club, but they didn't know this was a part of a culture and a
Oh,
movement that's going to dominate the planet. I didn't even know it was going to blow up that big. But I mean, it was just, I would say it was a need that
yeah.
pushed me into the competitions. So people have never ever in their lives seen anything like a performance that I did, as far as DJing go, because I used to take all my b-boy skills. I used to stand on my head and mix upside down. My head's on the floor, my legs are coming over onto the decks, and I'm manipulating the faders. I'm putting my legs over the
Wow.
turntables, and my arms are all over the place. I'm on the
Yes.
mic, I'm rapping, I'm scratching, I'm juggling. So that was completely unheard of. It was like a freaking alien that came down to earth for most of these DJs. you know. And
Yeah.
for me, I was just doing what I knew how to do. I never knew anything else. That was just, you
Yeah.
know, me. And I just knew it. I need those decks. I need those prizes. That was it,
Yeah.
man.
That's so awesome. I mean, like just to picture everything, like to put everything into place and like, wow, like to just see how it all started for you. It's really, really amazing. And I remember seeing you the first time live and I saw you do those things, scratching with your nose. I was like, what is he scratching with his nose? Elbows.
Oh
He's
yeah,
putting what? I don't know, whatever, behind awkward positions. And it's not even it's like, it's not just awkward position. You actually doing it on beat and everything is like, wow, I can't even do it right now. I look weird. I look weird doing this. But like you were doing it quickly and you like beat juggling and everything. I was like, yeah, it was.
yeah,
I've never
man.
seen anyone do it at that time, you know? People would like just
And
like,
it's
but like people's skills were like the other DJ skills were like quite simple, you know, the beat juggling and just scratching. But like you came with different styles of scratching with your shoe, take your shoe off, put your shoe on the deck while it's spinning. So that was dope. That was really, really dope. And
yeah,
it's actually surprising to hear that you were never really interested in the titles, you know, even though you racked up so many titles, you were more like, what can I win here that's actually gonna put me on the next level, you know? And
absolutely.
you were like doing DJing, you were doing your thing in the apartheid times, you know, and things were really, really tough. And I
Yeah,
believe, okay, your in your household they were really supportive because that's where the spark hit, you know, where the music and you experience a turntable and you experience music for the first time. But how was it like outside? How was the community like? You know, was it easy for you to maneuver and do your thing, or did you have some challenges in the community? That was kind of like, for example, hey, on Thursdays, you know, you can't walk over the field because that's when the gangs do their thing or whatever, or you have to be in by
yeah,
nighttime because the cops are coming around because it's apartheid, or you can't do this, you can't do that. Did you have any of those challenges? Can you share some of that with us?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we you know, living in Mitchell's Plain, it was one of those townships, you know, that was and still is plagued by gang violence, you know. And during that era, you know, the military and the cops were dispatched all over to set up checkpoints. You know, so with state of emergencies at the time as well, you had to be extremely cautious with where you go. Put that aside as well. As a kid growing up in that environment, you learn to become street smart, so you know how to move, when to move. You know, a lot of the people that I used to hang out with, school friends, you know, became like serious gangbangers, like hardcore. I'm talking about killers. They became killers. So, you know, hanging out with all these kids, you learn a lot about the streets. You learn a lot about the gangs because it's just all over. So you kind of you get that street education. The biggest challenge for me was when I started breaking or break dancing, you know, just for the lack of a better term, I started to break away from the friends that I used to move with at the time. And most of them thought that I was joining another gang and they
Oh,
were set on killing me
oh,
because
you
I
told
didn't
me.
hang out with them. I started to look different, walk different, talk different, and they thought something was up, you know. One day I was practicing on a cardboard right opposite my mom's place. There's a big open patch, open concrete patch, and there's a school in front. I was busy practicing by myself on this cardboard box, you know, doing this, my break dancing, and they came down the road and they practically stepped to me and they were like, "Oh, this is the nonsense you're busy with. Look at this guy." You know, like they say in gangster lingo, die jongen het 'n Frans geraak. You know, so to say, he's not a dude anymore.
Yeah,
He's a nothing now. They said, "Nah, los die ding," you know. Kyk hoe lyk hy. So I was in a tracksuit pants. I wasn't wearing the gangster, you know, the gangster uniforms no more. You know, the Nevadas, the Pringles, Town Talk caps, the Ray-Bans bent. You know, you had to have that whole freaking look, the Jack Basels, the Converse All Stars. That was kind of like, you know, the gangbanger look back in the day. So I changed all
yeah,
of that, and since that day, they were actually comfortable seeing me doing something they didn't quite understand, but they knew I wasn't a part of the gang because we used to
yeah,
start dancing on the streets on such a regular basis. Other kids would come to my mom's house, come and practice in my mom's house, And because we were living in close proximity of each other, they practically saw all of those things, and they started to enjoy it, And um, when we used to come back from the afternoon sessions at the club, in the after in the evenings coming back on the train, there was times that I had to take a different route through other gang territories to get home, because I couldn't take the shortcut straight from Lentige station and walk straight to where we live, because I would meet them all en route, and they would threaten us. And then we had to
Yeah.
take detours, and practically risk going through other gang territories to get home. But until that day when they saw, what I was busy with, that's the day I think that I was given another chance with life.
That's crazy, man. Like, did you know that they were setting up for you to attack you or to take you out? Did you know all of this at the time? Or
Yeah,
did they like
absolutely.
warn you and threaten you along the way and be like, hey, like, yanda gaat ze zien, Did they like, or or were you just shocked when they actually came and they saw you like, okay, now you're actually busy with something else?
Yeah,
Is
no,
it
no,
only
I
then
knew,
when
I knew, that there was conflict waiting. I
Mm,
knew that because we were chased, coming from the trains, and some of our
yeah,
friends were robbed and stabbed, and based on that, we had to take detours because they knew I was in that clique coming home um, on the 6 o'clock train, and they knew exactly when that train would come in to the station and who's getting off that train, because they used to rob people all the time, getting on and off the trains all the time, and they knew who that clique was and where
wow.
we were coming from, And until that day when they saw me breaking, man, that's when things started to turn around. Yeah.
Yeah. And when did you start traveling in your career? Was it with Prophets of the City already, or before when you were a dancer?
Yeah, my first travels as a dancer was in 1986, but it was local. And I think this was probably my first big break with Plastic Rockers, though. We ended up being in a major theater production called Joseph and His Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. This production went all over the country, and that's when we started to get a feel for touring. And when POC came along, we released our first album in 1990. It was. Um, we were lucky to meet Kaifa Semenya up in Joburg. He heard, of this group, and he heard of the African sounds that we were putting in hip hop music, and him and Quincy Jones were practically joined at the hip, if you want to call it that. And he pledged to take a selection of bands over to the Montreux Jazz Festival. And
Yeah.
thankfully, we were amongst those groups that went over to the Montreux Jazz Festival. So we spent a couple of months rehearsing in a studio up in Joburg with Kaifers, seeing all other bands perform. And our first international trip then happened in, I think it was 90, could have been late 90, early 91. So we went to the Montreux Jazz Festival. That was our first encounters performing internationally, with Quincy Jones being present as well. So that was a really mind-blowing experience.
Yeah.
And then our second trip was to Swaziland. And that was Jonathan Butler was on the bill. Joan Armatrading, she was huge at the time. And that was the first time that we performed to about 30,000 people that rocked up at that concert. And I mean, that was completely freaking mind-blowing. It was crazy at the time. And
Yeah.
ever since, as we released albums, as we toured, we practically toured this whole country for a period of almost 10 years consistently. And through these journeys, we got onto all these bills, all these gigs. And in 94, after Mandela was released, we were banned. And then a crew from the UK came over and they performed in Yeovil. We met up with them. They were pretty hardcore, pretty raw, and like very explicit, on the political front. And we performed with them. We didn't know that they had an independent label in the UK. And we built a relationship. They flew back to the UK. About a month later, the call came, guys, we're going to sign you guys up in the UK. We're going to get distribution through Beggars Banquet, which is one of the biggest distribution um, labels in the UK, or was at the time. And before you knew it, we packed our bags, based ourselves in the UK. And from there, we just ended up traveling all over UK, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. We performed in Eastern Europe before the Berlin Wall dropped. We were there. Our biggest fan base, believe it or not, was far north, all the way up in Norway. That was our biggest fan base, Norway. I mean, how's
Wow.
that for irony? Yeah, that was crazy. Scotland, Ireland, you name it, Northern Ireland, we were in all those places, for many, many years. That was our route.
So Norway was feeling the music that you were producing at the time.
100%. 100%. And I think
Huh.
it was more, they felt the energy, although they didn't quite
Okay.
understand what we were saying,
Yeah.
because our showcase and our music was packed full of African elements, and it
Yes.
was heavily driven with social and political messages, and the way we choreographed our movements, although it was hip hop, but there was a lot of Africa packed into our shows. And I would
Okay.
say that they loved it. They loved the audacity. They loved the fact that they could see a different part of South Africa as well. Otherwise, it was
Wow.
always the stereotypical images, Hector
Yeah.
Peterson, and people would only think Soweto was South Africa. People would mistake me for being Mexican. They all thought I was Mexican. They thought the other guys were Arabs, until
Yeah.
Ishmael Jr. Toured with us as well. And we ended up doing a lot of interviews, practically speaking to journalists and speaking to the audiences and trying to tell them, South Africa is a melting pot. There's so many different cultures. The history is such a broad history. You can trace it back to Asia, Malaysia. It goes throughout Africa. It goes into the US. It's the coup, it's the sun. It's such a broad history. And people didn't quite understand that, because that's not what the mainstream media gave them at the time. It was only Soweto that was building, and it was only state of emergencies and armed forces killing the people. But it was, sure, I hate to do this, but it was only black people. So
Yeah.
anything outside of a dark-skinned person didn't quite register with the international audience. That's why they were pretty
Yeah.
stunned, to see this group of guys on the stage, and they're all looking different. There's a Mexican, there's an Arab, there's a black guy. Where in Africa are you from? There's another black guy, but you look different to that black guy. So you need to sit down and explain to them and kind of massage their intellect a little bit, make them understand, how diverse the history is and the culture and all these things.
Yeah. I mean, like, who better than prophets of the city? Like you said, I mean, you had all of these different looking people, all also with different elements. I would say, like, or like you guys are like the Avengers of hip hop, and you would
Wow,
come
I
together.
never thought
And
of it
it's
that
like,
way.
no, definitely. If you put it again, like I'm just listening to the story, you guys are like really the Avengers of hip hop, and like you really gave them a good idea of what it looks and sound like, and what it feels like. Different kind of energies from different people bringing through the and I mean in Norway, probably majority of the people know one way or the same, and then yeah, you guys are so different. And you're doing so many different things, but you come together so beautifully. So I think that's also what was more beautiful than anything. Like they didn't have to understand what you were saying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just
It was
seeing
it
you
was
and
it was
feeling you,
energy.
and yeah, just experiencing you was enough. So I get it when you put it that way, that they were
Yeah.
actually feeling. I think anyway would feel it, if they
Yeah.
were to see that about.
And also the shows were so energetic, everybody moved. The stage was busy. There was
Yeah,
scratching. Then you find a guy flying through the air, coming over your head. This is the Ramon. Then there's popping and locking. Then there's breaking. And then you have the moment of silence. And then you have the history lesson. And then you have the protest. And then you have the music building up against. It was all these different elements and all this rawness of hip hop culture all integrated into all these things. There was nothing that looked and sounded like that ever, I think. Many
wow.
crews came, but I'm not saying this to blow my own horn, but I've never ever seen anything like Prophets of the City. Yes, we've been inspired and influenced by Public Enemy, definitely in a big way because of the militant stance. So a lot of that militant attitude and behavior came into our music. But with that militant, with being that militant, it was legitimate because we were genuinely affected by it back home, and we were
Yeah.
interacting with so many different people from different walks of life, especially people of color that's been oppressed in the UK, Native Americans that were on a tour trying to get back the crown feathers that were stolen from the tribes. So you're hearing politics and how people are dealing with oppression from their perspective, and all of that kind of make you understand what's actually going on in your own country, because oppression is oppression. It doesn't matter where in the world you are. The motive is the same, the intentions are the same, all of those things. So all of those things help, for us to understand what was actually going on. We tended protest. We were marching in UK, free Mandela, stop the oppression, all these things. So we were part of all of those things while traveling as well. And that also helped the growth and looking at international performances. It was totally incredible at the time, and that really started to filter into our stage presence as well, just looking at the huge scale and how people would inflate that artistic personality when they're performing. So all of those things became a part of Prophets of the City's growth as artists, as creatives, during that era.
Yeah. I'm so sorry about that. I don't know what just happened now. My internet just decided to have a bit of a snooze.
All
But I'm
good,
back
all good.
now. I'm so sorry about that. But thank you for continuing what you were sharing with us. Actually, we're getting close to ending the interview soon. But there's just two more questions I really want to ask you. So, with becoming the Grand Master, how did you get that title? Like, who was it?
Wow.
Like, what, did you have mentors like who taught you along the way? Was there a grandmaster before you? And he's like, you are a very young and skilled man. I've been watching you come up the ranks, and I now dub you the new grandmaster. How did you become grandmaster? Please share with us
Well,
that.
you know, America started to dish out grandmasters, So America had their first grandmaster who was Grandmaster Flash, and then there was Grandmaster Theodore and Grand Wizard. Sure, I think it was Kaz or something. No, Grand Wizard Theodore and Grandmaster Kaz and Grandmaster Flash. But Grandmaster Flash seems to be the most celebrated figure within hip hop because of
Yes.
his contributions and him pioneering the culture and what they have done as a collective through the years. Anyway, fast forward, still in Joburg, I then get a call from Hype Magazine to come on board with the first few editions as a guest editor. And I knew nothing about publications and magazines and whatever, but I think they actually meant consultant. But they decided, guy, you're the guest editor. Anyway, there I'm sitting, giving advice and whatever. So the first few editions of Hype Magazine launches, I step out of the picture, and Hype Magazine decides we actually need to do something to celebrate you, for your contributions to the culture and the effect and the impact that you've had, on the youth of South Africa. And the first Grandmaster title was actually given to me through Hype Magazine. And ever since, I think that created a further awareness of the journey and everything else that I was busy with Prophets of the City. I don't want to take the credit for myself. There's so many people that helped me along the journey. DJ Ready D or Grandmaster Ready D has never ever been a one-man show. There's a lot of people working behind the scenes and a lot of emotional support that I've received, from my parents, my wife, my family, honest friends, that didn't allow my ego to get out of control. So I've always been guided, by those people. And just being consistent, as an artist and as a personality that's willing to grow and to work with others. I think all of those things collectively probably encouraged other entities to award me as well. And I'm truly grateful, and I didn't expect it whatsoever, I didn't call myself the Grandmaster. It's just based on the fact that, so many people have agreed that I should get that title, and I'm totally humbled by it.
I think we all agree, and you deserve it. I mean, listening to your story, like you've literally had experience, you've paved the way, and you shared the stage with so much legends that we look at legends today. We only maybe saw on TV, or and you actually share the stage with them. You got to grow with them and be inspired by them. So I don't know who else would be the grandmaster. It wasn't you, you know,
Wow, man.
and you are killing it. Now, with last question. I want to take you into my time machine, and we're gonna go all the way back, way back, back at the time,
Got
back to
you.
the beginning when you started with when the passion hit you, when all of this. I want you to go back to that young Dion and telling him, like, now that you've walked the path that you are, and now that you're grandmaster, you have one piece of advice that you have for him. I don't know what you want to tell him about the journey or whatever to tell him, whatever you want to tell him. What would that piece of advice be?
I would tell him you should stay in school. Don't bunk. Don't let your friends do your homework for you. And yeah, learn accounting and learn about money, how to make money, how to save money, how to spend money, and learn how to respect money, because we're living in a time where if you don't have that resource, things become more challenging. So if only I had that education at a very young age, I think I would have been in a very different space right now, because of the things that I still wish to do, and so many of my dreams that I wish to fulfill, when it comes to um, building projects and doing things with our communities as well, and building all of these different entities that we could hopefully take across the world. So I would tell him definitely, Guy, education, although it sounds cliche, but there's no shortcuts through life. And if you are able to master that, you are actually going to get to where you need to be much quicker than the older DJ Ready Dion or the older Dion Daniels did.
Yeah.
So I'm still grinding, I'm still learning, I'm still reaching
Yes.
out, I'm still looking, um, forward to meeting people that could hopefully become a beacon, that could become a guide. I'm still on that path, so I still feel I still have a long way to go on while I'm on this journey and on this earth.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Wow, and that is a very powerful message, you know. And I mean, that's not just a message that you would go back and teach your the younger you. It's a message. It's something that we still learning today. You know, how to save money and how to do and how to budget and how to spend money and the importance of money, you know, and because these things are not being taught in our schools. And luckily that today we have something like Pocket Fin, actually the financial school of real life. So they do these things where they teach you about all of these, how to do investing, budgeting, and all of that stuff. And it just teaches you, makes you more financially literate, you know, more financial literate, sorry, so that you don't have these
Exactly,
mistakes
man.
and you don't stumble like most of us do, you know. I also need to learn a lot about that, and I'm actually learning about that right now with Pocket Fin. So yeah, DDD,
You need to
it's
share that information with me, man. I'm
oh
definitely on
yes, I
that
will.
path as well.
I
I
will
need to
definitely.
become more effective in how I deal with these things. If you
Yes,
if you didn't receive that education, yeah, man, you think you're saving, but you're not really. If you think you're spending, you always question yourself down the line, why did I do that? And sometimes we are being overpowered, and then we are burdened by our impulses as well,
yes,
unfortunately, because of that ignorance and that lack, and not having access to all of the opportunities that we do now, especially from an educational standpoint. We kind of in the position that we are right now, so at this age, that's a
yes,
huge part of my journey, is to try to understand that as well. And like I said, there's so many things that I wish to accomplish, and so many things that I wish to do as well, and it's all in the name of trying to help our communities grow, especially young people, youth grow. And you can't do that if you don't have that knowledge, and you don't have that sense of
Yo,
business, and you don't have the networks and the contacts that can actually
yeah,
help you get from point A to point B. So that's kind of where I'm at these days.
absolutely. Well, that's also my focus now, and Pocket Fund is definitely where we should like focus on. I'm definitely going to
Awesome.
share the links with you and get you interested
Thank
in
you.
that. Hopefully, you can also spread it further with your peeps that you are trying to help out as well. Lady D, it's
Absolutely.
been okay. Grandmaster, it's been an absolute pleasure. Wow, I really enjoyed speaking to you tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please follow Ready D on, oh, okay, that's right. Follow Ready D on all his social networks, please. And let's make the entertainment industry one of the best supported by locals, because local talent is liquor talent. Ready D, thank you so much for your time tonight. I just want to tell you that I really enjoyed tonight, and I'm sure most of our viewers also enjoyed tonight. You have an amazing story, and it really puts things in place and to understand, okay, who you truly are, and and there's so much we've been doing, that people don't know, and we learned about that tonight. So thank you so much. Thank you for being a guest tonight.
You're welcome, and then
All
thank you
right.
so much for the opportunity. And I also want to say thank you to all of your viewers, and I just want to wish you all of the best, man, and maybe get through this pandemic in one piece, and may we become, better and more effective human beings down the line. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Didi D. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you so much. Good night, sir.
You too. Thank you. Bye bye.
All right. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is it from the Grandmaster, and that is it from me. Please follow me on all my social platforms. That is on Facebook. You can catch me at Lunga Tshuka, the Energizer Funny. That is Lunga Tshuka, the Energizer Funny. And on Instagram, you can find me at Lunga Tshuka. That is at Lunga Tshuka. And also go over to YouTube and share this clip, share this interview with people that hasn't seen it tonight. Share, watch it again over. Please like and subscribe. We need the likes and the subscribers. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it from me tonight. My name is Lunga Tshuka. I've been your host. Good night.